Have you ever done this with your embossing powder? You go, you have it all nicely put on your paper, and then you either accidentally tip your paper or you use the heat gun too aggressively and you blow that embossing powder off, and you've got nothing left when it's done. Now, this is just one of the many mistakes that people make with embossing powder, and I'm going to go through 4 of those common mistakes and show you how to fix them today so that you can get those embossing powders out and start using them better and less messy ways so that you'll have a lot of fun with them. Today, we're going to be focusing on these mistakes and how to fix them. We're going to be using the Enchanted Alchemy, which is a set of 4 powders that is a new release from Wow Embossing Powder. We're going to look at these powders because of all powders, these are a little bit more difficult to use, and so I can show you those mistakes easily while we make a card. So let's get started with how you should heat embossing powder. Now I'm starting with die cut pieces. You could just do this on a plain piece, but I'm putting a piece of tape on the back to hold on so that I don't have any tweezer marks in my nice embossing powder. I've covered this in a clear embossing powder, and I'm using the new Amethyst Ice. Now this embossing powder is not solid. So you've got lots of embossing powders like gold that are a solid color. This one is more, I call this like a mixed media powder. It's got different textures and colors and all kinds of things, which sometimes makes it a little bit more difficult to use and heat. So we're going to start with the hardest possible option and show you the best way to heat it. So always start on the back if you're worried about blowing off your powder. And with this specific one, I'm actually going to heat quite a bit on the back until I start seeing some changes in the powder. Those changes are going to be difficult for you to see on the video because it is a matter of kind of like it almost looks a little bit shinier as it starts working. And once I start seeing some of that shine pop through, I can move to the top and go ahead and emboss here. Just be careful as you go. Make sure you're not blowing powder off. But as I emboss this, you can see that I'm heating some of the elements on the top as well. But everything is sticking to the bottom because I've heated it from the bottom to get the process of that melting already happening before I come on top with the heat. And yes, I'm close with the heat gun, and I want to keep that heat gun moving at all times. You will see with some of these thicker ones that these thicker embossing powders, that you can hold the heat on a little bit more than, say, a plain gold. The gold is going to start bubbling, but these more mixed media powders will not bubble, so you don't have to move quite as fast. Let me just cover myself there. I am sure somebody could get this powder to bubble, but it's not easy to do. So don't hold me to that there is no possible way that those will bubble. But here we go. So our next mistake that people make is with die cutting after they're creating. So I call this creating my own cardstock. When I want to create like a solid sentiment, like with this one, I'm going to use the platinum, and so I'll show you how to heat this as well, like we did in the last one, because I told you those powders are a little bit different. This is a thinner, finer powder, and so you do need to keep your heat gun moving on it. But a lot of people will go in and they will make a little panel here, and then they're going to die cut over this. And I'm going to show you a couple of reasons that you may want to consider die cutting before you heat emboss. So let me give you a couple of caveats on that. And you'll see that on this one, I am going and moving the embossing gun. This is going to be more likely to bubble than the other type of embossing powder. So I'm constantly moving and trying not to hold it directly on a specific area. You can see it kind of fading and becoming shiny where it's working. So most of the time you kind of know where to aim with your heat gun. Now, what usually happens here is I've made my panel. I've got all this melted. And then I go in and I throw my little letter die cut on it and put it through the die cutting machine. So I'm going to use this Believe sentiment, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So you see, I've had a little bit of time here. You would think that it's perfectly fine. But that embossing powder area, if I had touched it, I would know that it's a little bit warm still, and that is a problem. So if you're going to cut post die cutting or post heat embossing like this, you make sure that everything has cooled off. See how I'm going to hold this up close. Do you see how I'm missing little pieces on the E and the B? It's just white like the background. That's because it pulled it off with the die cut. And I will say sometimes even if you cool it off, you're still gonna have a little bit of if you've got too high a pressure on your die cutting machine, you're still gonna have some pulling of that embossing off of your die cut. So just make sure you don't set your pressure too high. I'm gonna show you if you start with die cuts, like I said, using a piece of tape behind it is helpful. I'm using the Spellbinders tape because it removes easily without ripping paper. And so I'm going to wad that up in a little roll behind my piece of die cutting, and then I'm going to use the heat tool. If you're using this tape trick for your die cuts, a couple of little key tips. I'm adding tons of ink so that I can make sure all that powder sticks to the front because once you've done it, if you missed a place with your ink, it's really hard to go back and fix that area. It can be done, but you want to make sure you have adequate ink. Now I'm pouring my powder on, and I know I'm a little bit off camera there. Sorry about that. But I'm pouring my powder on. I have not attached the piece of tape yet because I do not want this powder all over my tape or I'm going to get it stuck and it's just not going to stick well. So get your powder on your piece first, then grab your little wadded piece of tape and add it to the back of the die cut. Okay, so I'm going to grab my piece of tape, get everything out of the way because whenever you're heat embossing this and you've got a nice sticky mat here, you are going to get some particles that come off and it makes a huge mess on that sticky mat. So move everything out of the way, get ready for the heat embossing process. I actually put down a piece of paper towel. You could just use a piece of like letter paper. I just don't happen to have any in my craft room right now that's not crafting paper. So I'm just going to use this paper towel and some of this is going to dump off. Yes, I'm going to lose that. I could use my little coffee filter to dump it in, but I'm just trying to hold as much as I can on my die cut to get a nice thick coverage. So when I heat, like I said before, I'm going to heat from the bottom and I'm going to make sure I get things going before I start coming over the top because this embossing powder, as you can see, has some glitter to it. And glitter in your embossing powder is the easiest part to kind of blow off the top. So you want to get a good start on the back of this and then move to the top when you're heating. So it turns out just beautiful. Lots of variation in that color, and we still have our glitter on top because we heated it correctly. So using that piece of tape behind die cuts is really quite helpful. So make sure that you have a way, or you just let your die cut, make sure you don't actually die cut the piece until it is very cool. Let's look at our next mistake. This mistake is warping your paper. I'm going to show you how it happens and ways to fix it. This time I'm using a Simon Says Stamp sticky mat and I'm pouring over this wonderful embossing powder. Now, we've got this nice solid strip and we need to heat it. Let me show you how warping usually happens. Most of the time, especially with a very fine embossing powder like this, it's pretty easy just to heat the top of the paper. And that's the fastest way to do it too. So I am definitely guilty of this and warping can be fixed. So I'm going to show you ways to fix it, but I'm also going to talk to you about why it happens. One of the reasons that I feel like I get more warping is that when I get in a hurry and I'm only heating from the top because one, it's just so satisfying to watch that melt so quickly. Two, if I get my heater very close to the paper like I'm doing. And three, if I'm using a very thin paper. So it's a thinner paper, it warps easier, it's just the way that it goes. So let me show it to you in kind of another plane so that you can see this warping. It's almost like an S curve. So you know that that's going to be hard to stick down to your next piece of paper. So I'm going to show you some ways to kind of reinforce that if you accidentally warped it and you don't want to redo it. You can kind of help prevent it by going behind the warping and working on heating better. But here, this piece of paper is warped, and what I'm going to do is reinforce the paper. Remember how I said thinner paper, it seems to be a little bit more of a problem? Well, taking a very thick, heavyweight cardstock, I'm going to use a 110-pound accent opaque white, and I've die cut the same image out of this, and I'm going to use some double-sided adhesive. I'm going to be using Altenew's Ultra Sticky Tape, and this will give me a great seal, and I will flatten this out so that the warping is not as obvious, and it really kind of sticks the warping down to the other piece of paper and makes it a nice, flat, sturdy piece that you can use. And you can do this with lettering as well. So if you accidentally warp your lettering and you've already cut it out, you can just back it with more pieces of paper to give it some strength and help it hold a little bit better. Okay, you're probably wondering why in the world did I put glue on top of double adhesive? Well, I want to have a little bit of flexibility in how I'm placing this because once I place my circle and get it ready, it's still going to have a little bit of warp to it unless I put something heavy on top. So I'm going to add something heavy to keep it absolutely flat, and that little bit of movement of the glue I think helps keep the piece moving before it settles. But I need that double-sided adhesive to really hold it well because it really holds great and I feel like is stronger and faster at getting everything adhered than the glue. Okay, here we are with mistake number 4, and this is how you apply the embossing powder to the paper with making sure that you're taking advantage of all of that depth and mixed media type effects that some of these powders have. So this is not the same for something that's just a straight gold or straight clear. This is more this Seth Apter mixed media collection that we're working with right now that has so many different details and texture to it. I'm going to show you how you apply this to paper to make sure you take advantage of all of that. So you see how there's white pieces, pink pieces, purple, blue. There's so many different colors in this embossing powder that you want to treat it like it's a layering project. So see how the pink is kind of your back layer? Go ahead and dump off things, see what sticks to your paper. Most of this, because the particles are so much larger, you're going to have to add on and do it in layers to get those there because you want to kind of dump things off. If you don't want a big area of white like I did here, I'm going to dump a little bit off, but you really need to hold your paper flat so it doesn't fall off and carefully remove what you don't want. With this type of embossing powder, you're wanting all that detail. So continue to add if you don't have enough of the white details or the blue details or whatever you're looking for in your piece, make sure you add. And then we're going to heat from the bottom so that we don't lose all of this wonderful bulk. Once you start seeing change in that bottom layer, which I'm going to point to with my finger so that you can see how it's changing, right in this area, it started to get warm enough where it's actually holding everything on the paper. So I'm going to try to get the rest of it that same way. Do you see how it's kind of turning a little bluer? And now I can come to the top and add the heat here. And you want to do both ways. So I want to heat from the bottom, and then I want to hit it with some heat on the top because those white pieces are almost like a puffy type paint, and they melt at a different temperature than everything else. So you need to add some heat on top to make sure you've got everything where it's going to stay and melted. And I'm going to show you that at a faster speed too with this other color, copper dust, because I want you to see that I'm adding multiple layers. I'm tapping off and then I'm adding more. Like if I want a little bit more of the copper, then I can put more of that on the top, and then I'm going to heat it from the bottom. This one I'm speeding up so you can see how you can tell. And I feel like with this darker color, you can kind of tell a little bit easier as it heats up. The other thing I want to say is do not heat any of these without heating up your heat tool. Now, we've been heating this whole time, so my heat tool is plenty hot, but you want to get a little bit of heat going before you start blowing on these really thicker pieces because sometimes it's not hot enough, so it just blows the pieces off. But you see how I got that one started, and now I'm finishing it off on the top, and look at that cool color change. So we've got all these circles. Let's put this card together. Now, I don't know if you are into masculine cards or not, but if you've been following my channel very long, you know that I love making them. Now, the fate of this card is actually quite hilarious, but we're going to make it. I'm going to tell you what happened to it. I don't think you're going to actually believe it because it's such a funny story. But basically, all I'm using are circles. So you can make a masculine card. Sometimes I think the easiest masculine cards are just geometric shapes. But using some amazing embossing powder like this that has so much texture and really to me almost looks like a galaxy because it has so many different colors in it can really enhance that project versus just cutting out some circles from colored cardstock. I wanted to keep this card where it was really focusing on the texture. So I found this piece of textured paper that came in one of my Your Paper Insider boxes. It's got a lot of texture, and so I just am adding it to another circle so that we can have some options on the front. And this is just going to poke out behind one of those embossed circles. So I'm going to trim it up and let me show you what I did. Here's how I decided to assemble these, and I wanted to put that black textured paper in between some of these because I think it just shows off the embossing even more. I use this acrylic block to make sure I've got this stuck down and everything's nice and flat, and I grabbed a piece of dark gray cardstock because I thought it just looks so good with these colors. Then we've got our piece of textured paper. We've got another circle and our little bitty circle, and we're going to put an awesome sentiment on here that works perfect for any type of card, but I'm going to use this one as a masculine card, at least so I thought until the disaster happened, which is coming next. All right, here's this card. I did a large celebrate. That's from an Altenew set. I'll make sure to link everything in the description for you if you're looking for supplies today. Make sure that you've hit like and subscribe, and let's talk about the fate of this card. I was so excited about this card. I could not wait to use this for one of my teenage boys or their friends, and I love having a stash of masculine type cards that my teenagers will use, and I knew they'd already said they really loved what I was doing with this one. I knew they were going to love it, and I had to stop crafting and have dinner. So I put this on a shelf in my craft room, which is normally off limits to this little guy. Let me pop him up. So cute, isn't he? But here's what he did. The only reason I knew the card was gone is I caught him chewing on these last little pieces. So this card is no longer in existence, but it's an easy remake and I'm definitely going to make it again. I hope that you enjoyed the process as much as I did. I'm going to enjoy it twice since my doggy took care of it. So I hope that you have a great day. Thank you so much for joining me on the channel today. And if you haven't done it, it really does help me if you hit the like and subscribe button. That helps more people see my videos and really helps you support me in a free way. And I appreciate it so much. I hope that you have a great day. I will see you soon. Bye.